On today's show, you take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and you have the Capitals 24-25 season. Get up with the get down with another early exit by your favorite team and mine next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about what comes next for the Capitals. And you take a look at this team, it's still a bit of a head scratcher for me. And it reinforces my thought and many other people's thoughts that the stats that you see during the regular season mean zero once you make it to the playoffs. Take a look at the Capitals winning the Metro, winning the Eastern Conference, eliminated. Take a look at the Jets, the best team in the NHL, eliminated. Many people favored the Golden Knights to win it all, eliminated. That it means zero, the stats that you have during the regular season. It doesn't translate to the postseason. So what is next for the Capitals? I'll talk about that a bit later. I'll talk about Alex Ovechkin and one last ride with this team. In Breakdown Day, or on Breakdown Day, he said that he would come back. He has 1 year left on his contract. He said that he would honor his contract and play that final season with the Capitals. Is there any plans of Ovi being on the team after that? I'll talk about that. But just to get it going here, a crushing end for the Capitals. And the last episode I did was more of a live episode, so I'm going to break down my thoughts on the final game and, the round 2 in general. You take a look at the Capitals. Like I said, there was a lot of hope, a lot of promise going into the playoffs. We heard about the vibes that surrounded this team, everything was just riding high. And, people are talking about, is this the makings of a Stanley Cup winning team? How fitting. Alex Ovechkin catching and passing Gretzky. It just seems like this team is riding on a high, but they got shot down back to earth with what I'm going to call an early second round exit. Now, to be clear here, it is an improvement. It is the first time since 2018 that they've made it past the first round. So steps forward, yes, but ultimately my goal for this team was Stanley Cup final or bust. And I understand, I've had time to think about it. I take a look around the NHL. There's 32 teams, and only one team can ultimately win the Stanley Cup. And I get that. I don't want to set the bar low, but I've had time to mull it over. And all things considered, I'm happy where this team finished. Ultimately, I had hopes for more. But at the end of the day, they did something that many other teams around the league were not able to do. And the one thing I know about the Capitals is they make it to the playoffs on a consistent basis year after year after year. Now, I understand, like I said, it's been quite some time since they pushed their way past the first round, but just making it to the playoffs on a consistent basis in and of itself is quite an accomplishment. So, you take a look at the Capitals and how they handled the Canadiens. Quite a bit of pushback from the Canadiens as well, but an easier series for the Capitals, suffice to say. And then we moved on to round number 2. And, one of the things that Frank Seravalli talked about is that the Capitals were not a battle-tested team. And that really got drawn into focus. And even Dylan Strome and many others were saying that there's not a lot of guys on this roster that have ever played in the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs before. Playing well during the regular season, like I said, doesn't really mean anything once you make it to the postseason. So it's interesting that even the players themselves have acknowledged that. So, like I said, listening to Frank and all these different shows, they said before the playoffs even started, before the first game of the playoffs started, they said the Capitals are good. But if you're asking me, it's a coin flip. If it's the Capitals and it's the Hurricanes, or the Capitals and the Panthers, whatever the case might be, that just based on, being battle tested, like I said, the Capitals had not done that for the most parts. But let's dive into the final game of the season, and ultimately the end of the second round. And the Hurricanes, it finished with a whimper, I guess I'm going to say, at Cap One Arena. The dagger of a goal from Andrei Svechnikov with just 1:59 left in Game 5. That unlikely angle wrister beat Logan Thompson. And that was it. There was hope in that entire game. And I had said before that I had a feeling, I had a hunch that maybe the Capitals would rally. Maybe they would dig deep and find a way to win game number 5. I never said I thought they were going to win this series, but I thought they were going to be able to pull it out. But what really got drawn into focus was the skilled players on the Hurricanes. I don't want anything else said. It was a skilled game, and it was a skilled series won by a better team. That's it. No more, no less. A team that routinely makes pushes into the playoffs. And that's ultimately why they're moving on to the next round. But I feel bad for Logan Thompson, who has been stellar for the Capitals this past entire season. And what the Carolina Hurricanes noticed is that he struggles with those severe angle shots, and they kind of feasted on it, or they tried to shoot from sharp angles as often as they possibly can. But it was difficult for Thompson, who had been stellar all season, and that ultimately sealed a 3-1 Carolina win and a 4-1 series victory. And, I think that the Capitals were dialed in for the most part in game number 5. It's just, you saw a lot of things come into focus. John Carlson, Alex Ovechkin just looked like they were getting overworked. And that you take a look at John Carlson and Alex Ovechkin, 2 players on the back 9 of their career, that you need a little bit more punch. I think that, Pierre-Luc Dubois was a good addition, and the different forwards that were brought in, Duhaime, Radish, these kind of guys, Ryan Leonard. But I still think they need a little bit more punch. I think that, July, this summer, I think they should bring in a skilled forward, a guy that maybe has more playoff experience. Who that is, I'll dig into that a little bit more in the coming episodes, as there's a lot of time between now and the start of next season, or let's just say now in July, in free agency, on who that is. But I think that was one of the things that got drawn into focus, was a skilled forward, to just a guy that's like, I've been there, I've done that. Alex Ovechkin, still a great player, make no mistake about it. But, you're starting to see a bit of a diminished return. And why I'm comparing this here is that they have those skilled kind of players on the Carolina Hurricanes. Even though you say, many people say that there's no star player on that team, they still find a way to get it done, because the Capitals eliminated, setting up tea time. Ovechkin's heading back to Russia. Sandin's going back to Sweden. All these players are returning to their native countries, or, in Charlie Lindgren's case, he's welcoming fatherhood, so there's a lot of greatness surrounding by some sorrow, I guess I could say. But you got to turn the page and get ready for what's next. And head coach Spencer Carbery called it, quote, awful. And you could feel that frustration from a group that believed it could go all the way. I had a feeling. I'm not gonna acquiesce. I'm not gonna be a revisionist. I really thought that there was going to be some June hockey in the cards for the Capitals, and the belief wasn't unfounded. They had clawed their way to the top seed in the East after a smart roster overhaul and Ovi's unforgettable run at Gretzky's record. And what I talked about after, the series loss was, I think this team was fixated on the Ovechkin thing, that, they weren't even really concentrating, I think, on making it to the playoffs. They were just like, let's get Ovi this record. Let's do it. And then after that, I think it created a bit of a vacuum around this team. Like, now the focus is off Ovechkin. Now we need to, we're in a good position. Let's make hay while the sun shines here. And all of a sudden the Capitals did the thing. They won the Eastern Conference. They won the Metro, but the weakness in the armor was exposed in the second round. Carolina was better, plain and simple. They won the battles, dominated possession, and played winning hockey. Svechnikov's goal, it wasn't just the game winner. It was a statement of a series that was played the right way. The better team advanced. Carbery's team showed flashes, but ran into a wall. For the 15th time in 16 postseason appearances during Ovechkin's career, the Capitals fell short of the conference finals. And, it's difficult. It is a very difficult thing. And I'm pouring over all the breakdown videos and watch them a couple times, trying to absorb everything. And a lot of the players are saying the tough part is this, like, we want to get back out there and do it again. We think we can do it. But you got to wait through the summer. You got to go through camp. You got to go through the full season. It's going to be difficult. But considering preseason expectations, most national outlets had the Caps in the bottom half of the league. This year was a surprise in the best way. And that's the way I choose to look at it, and I felt like the season was a bust if they didn't make it to the Stanley Cup final, but that was just me setting expectations. Those were expectations based on how I saw this team perform throughout the season. But things changed, right? And the Capitals had faced Carolina, and they had a hard time with them during the regular season. Kind of mixed production and mixed wins and losses there. But all things considered, Carolina was the better team. They moved on. Now the Capitals, they need to rest. They need to reset and already start planning for what's next season. And the one thing that we know relatively certain is it's not going to be the same team. They're not going to run it back with the same team fully. That's just never usually the way that it goes. This Capitals team, the 24-25 season, I want to say proud of you guys. You did the Capitals jersey, you did the city, you did the fans proud. Hold your head up high. It didn't go the way you want, but sometimes in life, you got to get it through your head. Things don't always go the way you want them to. You got to brush your shoulders off and get ready for the next round. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about one last ride for Alex Ovechkin. We know that he has 1 year left under contract, but what after that? I'll discuss straight ahead. Ever check your banking account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without all the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. On the last segment I talked about, it's over. The Capitals need to start setting their sights for next season, and next season is going to ostensibly be the last season, if you can believe it, for the Great Eight, Alex Ovechkin. And, this is something that we saw on the horizon for years, that I know that, it's a ways away. He's going to go home to Russia and train and spend time with his family and just do the things that he doesn't get to do during the regular season. And then, that's the countdown to the end of Alex Ovechkin's time with the Capitals. And, they pushed him a little bit on breakdown day, asking him if he had plans after next season. And, the one thing I know about Alex Ovechkin is he lives in the right here, right now. He doesn't like to guess. He doesn't like to pontificate about what the future holds. The farthest that he knows is that he's going to be playing for the Capitals next season. After that, I don't think he really knows. If you're asking me, I think that next season will in fact be his last season. I mean, he's done the things that he's wanted to do. He has the Gretzky record. He won a cup. And, you could keep chasing things down, thinking you can win another cup, kind of like Tom Brady did, retiring, unretiring. I'm going to chase it down. And at the end of the day, you just have to admit and kind of just reflect on what you accomplished and say, I did a lot of great things. I won a cup. I won all kinds of awards. I got to move on to the next phase of my life. But that's what it's going to be. Next season, it's my belief, one last ride for the Great Eight, if you can believe it. Now let's talk legacy and the man who defines it in DC, and that's none other than Alex Ovechkin. He turns 40 years old in September. We know he passed Wayne Gretzky's all-time goal record, and he says he'll be back for year 21. I do believe it. I would be most surprised if he says that he's not. Alex Ovechkin, from what I've observed from him, is a man of his word. It doesn't have a lot of personal baggage. He doesn't have, these different stints, trying to get his head straight. He seems screwed on pretty straight. He is a pretty centered premier athlete. So if he says he's coming back next season, go ahead and take that to the bank. He's coming back next season. And Ovi confirmed he's returning next season, the final year of his current 5-year, $47.5 million contract. His focus this summer, rest, train, and come back ready. And yes, he joked about having to make the roster at 40. He joked, and he does have a sense of humor. He said, what am I going to do right now? I'm going to head to Hershey. I'm going to help the Hershey Bears. Wouldn't that be something? I mean, you want to see some trepidation and fear in your opponent, have Alex Ovechkin put on a Bears jersey and take to the ice skating there. But, that would be quite a sight to see. But Alex Ovechkin, like I say, at, coming up on 40 in September, just do the things, enjoy life, soak it all in, savor it. Everything vanishes. Ovechkin scored 44 goals this year, third most in the league, and led the team again in the postseason with 5 tallies. He was everything the Caps needed him to be, even after coming back from a broken leg. And, the one thing we could say is I wanted to see more from him in the second round, but, I don't think it was from a lack of trying. This team, the cohesive team as a whole, didn't have a lot of success. So, if next season is the last of Ovechkin era, the question becomes, is the future bright? I think it is. And, one of the things that I will say as well, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, is the youth core on this team is I think the Capitals are in a good position. Not just youth. There is experienced players sprinkled in. I said that Alex Ovechkin, in my opinion, next year will be his last year with the Capital, his last year in the National Hockey League. However, there is a caveat. There is an asterisk. I think there is the distinct possibility that he puts a bookmark on the end or bookend on the end of his career and plays one season in the KHL. That's where it all started for him. There's no pressure to do it. It's just something like, kind of a tip of the hat to his home country, that if that's what he wants to do, I could see that being a possibility. So, but talking about the future, I've just talked about Alex Ovechkin and his last ride with his team. And, the changing of the guard, the belief is that Tom Wilson is going to be the next captain. And you've seen him take on captain-like traits, welcoming players, as soon as they join the team, and just leading by example. And Coach Spencer Carbery believes that the future is bright as well. Wilson, Chychrun, Roy, McMichael, Protas, Leonard form a young, evolving core. Add to that PLD and Dylan Strome as top 6 anchors, and there's real promise beyond the OV years. And, it's interesting. It's one of the things that, people love you one moment. I'm talking about OV catching and passing Gretzky, and already people are like, man, Ovechkin and John Carlson should just hang it all up right now, that it doesn't matter what you accomplish. If you don't check all the boxes that the fans want, they're ready to send you out of town right now. But talking about the promise beyond the OV years, yes, I think that Alex Ovechkin has been huge. He has been the heartbeat of this team. When you think Washington Capitals, 9 out of 10 people are going to think of Alex Ovechkin, a guy that has revolutionized hockey in the district. And, his reputation and the shadow that he has cast will be far withstanding his time once he retires and hangs up the skates. He put this team in a good position. And I think that Alex Ovechkin understands the lay of the land. He understands his role. He understands that, he's going to be 40 next year, and he's not going to go out like Jaromir Jagr, kind of just, like these cover bands that just have one original member, just like, hey, we're a foreigner. Alex Ovechkin understands who he is. I don't think he's going to, excuse the expression, try to beat a dead horse. I think that he understands who he is as a man. He sees his diminished, physical capabilities. Father Time is undefeated, all those kind of things that I think it's possible. So still change around this team is inevitable. Carlson is entering the final year of his deal. Wilson is the captain in waiting, and Carbery looks like the right coach to guide the transition. If there is a perfect coach for the Capitals, make no mistake about it, it is Spencer Carbery. When you watch and listen to the breakdown videos, a lot of the younger players, Connor McMichael, for example, talk about Spencer being huge, even when down in Hershey, when he was working with him, for him rather. And that he's just a guy that is willing to give you straightforward advice, going to give you, tough love here or there. He is the perfect coach at the perfect time. But Tom Wilson summed it up. He said, quote, "We've got a great foundation of a team. Just tough to think about not having this exact group next year," unquote. And that sentiment was one that was echoed by most all the players on breakdown day, that there's no one, casting shade in anyone's direction. Like, if it wasn't for that guy, we would have done more things. This was a team that, everyone said had great vibes. The chemistry was amazing with this team. Everyone loved everyone. That was the impression that they wanted everyone to believe, and I believe it. I think that everyone got along really well, and a lot of that was that the Capitals played really well. And when your team plays very well, it's easy to get along with one another. But the Capitals need to do that. They need to plan for the next phase. Alex Ovechkin, next season, then off to the great unknown, and then it's the next wave of Capitals players. Who am I talking about? I'm talking Crystal, Leonard, Mirshnyshenko, these kind of guys, that those are going to be the faces of the future of your favorite team and mine, the Capitals. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about key losses, injuries, and what's next for this team. I'll break it all down straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So what is next for this team? Going into the playoffs, there was some changes that weren't anticipated. Injuries are things that you really can't anticipate, and Marty Faravari, not being in the playoffs when the Capitals needed him the most was not ideal. And I think that you really saw that drawn into focus. Lars Eller, the player that the Capitals acquired again in hopes of trying to, play those vintage vibes from the 2018 season, I think left a bit to be desired. If the Capitals were hoping for 2018 Lars Eller, that's not who it was. It was a glimmer of a man that once was. But let's talk about what comes next for the Capitals here. Let's finish off today with a look at the pieces that fell out of place and what needs fixing this summer. Like I talked about, Martin Faravari's season-ending injury in Game 81 was a massive blow to this team. And I don't want to say the Capitals would have won round two had Marty Faravari been in, but I think that it would have been more evenly matched. One that didn't get enough attention outside the locker room. Carbery admitted it. Losing Faravari was more impactful than many realized. And a guy that gives 100% each and every time he plays, his impact was immense. Faravari was crucial. Top PK minutes, strong shot metrics, a shutdown presence. Without him, the D-core stretched thin. Carbery had to shorten the bench. Alexiev barely played. Everyone else had to log big minutes, and a lot of pressure put on Alex Alexiev, a guy that was in the cryogenic deep freeze for a line's share of the season and played okay. I think that, a lot of the players said that, he played great. I mean, he played okay. I mean, I think that there should have been a better option, that when you make it to the playoffs, that you should have someone else in the cupboard to pop out instead of a guy that is, to be honest with you, a bit of a question mark. But Ferravarri's absence hurt, and it showed. And the Capitals really never had the answer. They toyed with ideas in Game 5. You saw Connor McMichael playing that third line center position, and they didn't take any real risks on the blue line. That was the perception, was that putting Dylan McElrath, a guy in his own opinion is not the greatest skater. And then you have Ethan Bear, which we don't really know. What kind of NHL player is he this year? Played well for the Hershey Bears, but all things considered, a lot of question marks. And then, like I said, there's the Lars Eller thing. Was emotional during the breakdown day, but confirmed he still wants to play, and he's not done yet. He's done with the Capitals. I'm almost 100% sure of that, but I think that if he is willing to accept a smaller role, with another NHL team, then I think that's possible. I think he can still ultimately find a job in the NHL, probably, in a more of a diminished role. He's probably not going to make the same kind of money that he once did. And it'll be interesting to see where Lars Eller lands. I don't think that if there's ever, a situation where there's not a team vying for his services, I would really be surprised if he would accept like an AHL deal, anything like that. But the thing that was apparent is that Eller added stability at first when he joined the team, as that team was a bit of a turnstile at the center position. You remember LaPierre, you remember Scarbosa, these kind of things, that the feeling was that Lars Eller was going to be that anchor on that third line center position. Ultimately, asking me, the long-term answer at the third line center position in-house, Connor McMichael. On breakdown day, he said that, and I'll talk about in a future episode, that's where he wants to play. He doesn't get to say where he wants to play. He goes, ultimately, I'll play wherever Carbery wants. But if you're asking me, I want to play center. That's the position that I love. That's the position that I'm most comfortable with. And I think that, in that game, in Game 5, he played well. I definitely think it's worth a look in camp. Again, oftentimes you sketch these things out, and, Chris Patrick, I was going to say Brian McClellan had different plans last summer. So we don't know. They might try to plug it with another player as well. But I think Connor McMichael at least deserves a kick at the can at the third line position, third line center position. Now, looking ahead, the Caps will have some flexibility. They'll need to address depth scoring, retool the third line, and decide how much youth to inject into the roster. Like I talked about, there's a lot of excitement around Crystal as well. But I think it's important to temper that expectation a little bit, because you saw Ryan Leonard, and one empty netter, I was hoping for more. So I don't think, much in the same way that Ryan Leonard is going to take a while to ramp up. I think he's going to grow by leaps and bounds next season. I think he's going to be a full-time member. But, for Crystal, it might be a slow ascension as well. And what about the blue line? Ferravarri will be back. Sandin and Chychrun are locked in, but Carlson's future and usage of depth guys like Alexiev need clarity. So that's the big thing going forward. Who is going to be on the team, after next year? And next year, I think that John Carlson, the minute monster that played a tremendous amount of time in years past, is going to see more of a limited role. As I still don't know what was wrong with Carlson at, more specifically in the second round of the playoffs. But, I think his age is coming into focus. I haven't heard anything about an injury yet, but that is one of the things that I speculated about. But it's all about having your eyes fixed to the future as times are changing. Alex Ovechkin, the biggest piece that will be riding out into the sunset here, that I think the Capitals will have to broaden their view on the roster in general and see what the future faces of this team will be. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holney, and I'll talk to you again next time.